I've been at this since 2004. In that time, I've stress-tested 3 full household communication plans across actual grid-down events, 2 regional ice storms, 1 6-day blackout after a substation fire, and 1 situation that lasted 11 days and got bad enough that I don't use it as a hypothetical anymore. I've run checkpoint scenarios, I've live-tested rally points with my family, I've burned through more freeze-dried food than I care to count figuring out what actually holds up. I've also made every mistake in the preparedness playbook, which is exactly why I know where the gaps are. The gap is almost never the gear. The gap is always the framework. Let's start with checkpoints, because most people have this completely wrong. A checkpoint is not primarily a security measure. It's an information collection point and a movement control mechanism. Whoever runs it learns who's in the area, what resources people are carrying, and which direction the population is flowing. That's valuable intelligence. And in a grid-down scenario past the 48-hour mark, whoever controls a choke point controls the narrative of the surrounding territory. The assumption civilians bring to a checkpoint that the people running it have legitimate authority and stable institutional backing is usually correct in a functioning society. On day 3 of a blackout, with no cell signal and no official communication, that assumption will get you sorted into a category you did not choose, by people whose chain of command may have dissolved sometime the previous afternoon. Here's what I was taught and what I've verified under field conditions. The read happens at a distance, before you're visible, before you're in line. You're looking at geometry. Where are the entry points? How many people are managing traffic? Is there a visible perimeter, or is the control point isolated? Are personnel positioned for threat response or for observation? Those questions take about 15 seconds to answer from 100 yards out. And the answers tell you whether you're looking at an organized operation with backup and protocol, or 4 people with rifles and a folding table who decided that morning they were in charge. Here's the behavioral tell that matters most. Organized operations have redundancy. More than one person processing. Someone watching the perimeter while others work the vehicles. Communication equipment actively in use. Improvised operations have urgency and rigidity. They ask too many questions or too few. They're focused on the vehicle, not on the road behind you. They're not watching their own perimeter. Uniformed does not mean organized. Organized does not mean legitimate. The visual markers civilians use to assess authority vests, patches, official-looking vehicles, can be replicated by anyone who planned ahead. You cannot read legitimacy from appearance alone. You read it from operational behavior. The most dangerous moment at a checkpoint is not when you're at the front of the line. It's 30 seconds before, when you're still far enough back to be invisible. That's the decision window. Once you've pulled to second position, your options have collapsed. You're visible, you're close, and leaving reads as a threat. The decision go through, reroute, or hold position and observe has to be made before you're in effective range. Civilians miss this window because they're watching the car in front of them, waiting for their turn. By the time they've assessed the situation has already assessed them. I've run this scenario deliberately, with family members, in a vehicle, on roads I know, so that the decision-making is automatic before I ever need it in a real event. Not because I'm expecting a crisis. Because the read has to be trained, not improvised. The checkpoint is a question with spatial dimensions. Your answer isn't verbal, it's directional. Now the blackout, and specifically, the part nobody talks about correctly. A blackout is not a power event. That framing is what utility companies want. It positions restoration as the solution and keeps you waiting passively. From the standpoint of a community's functional nervous system, a blackout is a communications degradation event. The power going out is the trigger. What follows is a cascade of information failures that begins within the first hour and becomes structurally significant by hour 6. The timeline is consistent across documented events, and I've lived a version of it twice. Hours 1 through 2, people wait. The assumption is that restoration is coming. Behavior is largely normal. Phones are getting checked, neighbors aren't yet talking. By hour 4, the waiting has converted into uncertainty. People start making contact. Rumors move faster than verified information because verified information requires infrastructure that no longer functions. By hour 6, informal authority structures have begun to emerge. Someone is organizing the block. Someone with a generator is making decisions about who gets access to it. Someone with a truck and fuel has become a person of unexpected significance. The social hierarchy of the neighborhood is reorganizing around resources and information, not around the roles people held before the lights went out. Here's what I do, and what I've done, in that window. I walk out onto my porch in hour 2. I make eye contact with neighbors. I say, clearly and simply, what I know. The substation 3 miles east is out. Restoration estimates are running 12 to 24 hours minimum. Here's what I'm doing. Come find me if anything changes. That's it. That's the whole act. What it does is introduce a verified data point into an environment running on rumor and worst-case speculation. It doesn't require rank. It doesn't require equipment. It requires having decided in advance that you're going to be a stabilizing presence rather than another anxious variable in the neighborhood. The information vacuum is the actual danger, not the darkness. Darkness is manageable. People have candles, flashlights, camp lanterns. What people don't have, 6 hours into a blackout, is a reliable picture of what's happening and how long it will last. And in the absence of that picture, the human threat detection system runs without a counterweight. Alarming information travels faster than reassuring information. That's not irrationality, it's biology. The alarm system prioritizes alarming signals because ignoring a real threat is more costly than overreacting to a false one. In a stable environment, that system is dampened by the steady flow of normalizing information from phones and news. Remove that flow, and you see what the system does, unmoderated. Disaster research going back to the 1970s shows the critical inflection point is not hour 1 and not hour 24, when adaptation has set in. It's the window between hours 4 and 8. Looting events, conflict at resource points, and improvised checkpoint formations all cluster in this window. The people who move through that window without incident are the ones who entered it, with pre-made decisions and visible calm. Not gear. Decisions and calm. So, here's the actual framework, not the tactical fantasy version, the version that works. Pre-established rally points and communication protocols. You decide in advance who contacts whom, in what order, using what method, and where people go if primary contact fails. I have this conversation with my household once a year, on a regular Tuesday when nothing is wrong. It goes like this. If the power goes out and phones stop working, the first person to reach a neighbor with a radio checks in within 2 hours. If that fails, we move to the rally point, a specific physical location, not a vague instruction. The rally point has a backup. The backup has a backup. This requires no equipment beyond what most households already own. It requires the conversation having happened before it's needed. Most families haven't had it. Most families are improvising in real time, spending cognitive resources on decisions that should have been made in advance at exactly the moment when cognitive resources are most depleted by stress. Tiered readiness, not binary states. Not calm or panic. Graduated. You've pre-decided what actions correspond to what conditions, so that when a condition changes, you're executing a decision rather than making one. I don't have to think about whether to move medication to the cooler when the power hits hour 6. I decided that years ago. I don't have to assess the checkpoint in the moment. I've already decided what a legitimate versus improvised operation looks like, and what each answer means for my route. These decisions cost nothing to make in advance. They cost enormous cognitive and emotional resources to make under stress, with incomplete information and people depending on you. The 7-2-hour behavioral window, and this is the one most people in the preparedness space get wrong. The standard framing is about supplies. Have 72 hours of food and water. That's not wrong. It misses the more important point. The 7 2-hour window is about behavioral normalization under stress. The physiological stress response elevated cortisol, narrowed attention, impaired executive function diminishes significantly after 36 to 48 hours of sustained disruption, provided basic needs are met and the situation isn't actively deteriorating. The body adapts. The mind recalibrates. But people who have never experienced sustained disruption hit the panic cascade hard in the first 12 hours and make their worst decisions there. People who have rehearsed disruption, who have spent a deliberate weekend without power, who have navigated situations with partial information and no outside help, have a lower baseline panic response. The nervous system has a reference point. It knows this is survivable because it has survived it before. I ran a 7-2-hour no-power drill with my household in the winter of 2019. No phones except for scheduled check-ins. No convenience store runs. No heat beyond what we had staged. It was uncomfortable and occasionally frustrating, and absolutely nothing close to an emergency. But the next time a real outage hit, something was different. The first hour didn't feel like a crisis. It felt like a drill we'd already done. That reference point is worth more than any piece of gear I own. You can build it deliberately. It requires attention and a weekend, not money. Here's the pattern, stated plainly. The preparedness market sells products because products generate revenue. A rally point conversation doesn't ship in 2 days and doesn't photograph well. Pre-decided tiered responses generate no review cycle, so they don't get marketed. What gets marketed is the bag, the generator, the radio, the freeze-dried food, all of it useful, none of it sufficient, and all of it requiring replacement and upgrade on a schedule that keeps you in the market. The framework that makes the gear useful cannot be packaged, so it isn't sold. The knowledge exists. It lives inside military units, emergency management agencies, and search and rescue organizations. It circulates among people who don't think of it as specialized knowledge, because to them, it's just how you think. And it stays invisible to the consumer preparedness market, because that market is organized around products, not around the cognitive and social architecture that makes people genuinely functional when systems fail. There's one more thing worth saying. A community that can self-organize during disruption is a community that requires less external management during disruption. A neighborhood that fills its own information vacuum doesn't get shaped by whoever controls the emergency broadcast. A household that has pre-decided its response framework doesn't freeze at the checkpoint, doesn't get swept into the panic cascade, doesn't become a dependent variable in someone else's management of the event. This isn't subversion, it's competence. But distributed, self-sustaining community competence is structurally inconvenient for centralized disruption management. That's not a conspiracy, it's just how institutions work. Understanding it is part of the framework. 3 things exit 3 traps. Checkpoint literacy exits the compliance trap, not because you refuse to comply, but because you've already made the decision before compliance is requested. You read the geometry from 100 yards out, you identify the window, and you've already decided before the situation decides for you. Blackout protocol exits the information vacuum not because you have better equipment, but because you fill the vacuum with a verified data point and visible calm before fear fills it for you. Pre-decided frameworks exit the panic cascade not because you're braver, but because the decision is already made and your nervous system has a reference point that says this is survivable. None of this is classified, none of it is gear, it's never been hidden behind a wall. It's been invisible because the market has no way to sell it, and the people who carry it natively don't think of it as special. The grid will go down again. The checkpoint will appear again. The information vacuum will open again on your street, in your neighborhood, in the 6 hours when it matters most. The man across the street didn't freeze because he had already decided. Decide before you need to. That's the whole lesson. Start this Tuesday.